Hello, everybody. I have recently acquired or reacquired the ability to upload videos to YouTube. So here's the other presentation. We're going to keep going on with chapter 3 of unit 7. Oh, I forgot my intro, didn't I? Well, yes. Hello, I'm Mr. Ancharsky, World AP World History. And like I said before I gave my proper introduction, we are on chapter 3 of unit 7. But your bell work is on the screen. What do you already know about World War I? I'm going to use this acronym a lot. So this chapter is entitled The Causes of World War I. You can see all these smiling British soldiers on this tank right here. They're not going to be so smiling at the end of this unit. Lesson objective today, pretty simple. Explain the causes and consequences of the First World War. But before we even talk about that, we first have to look at the geopolitical situation of Southeast Europe. Because, to quote Otto von Bismarck, the next great European war will happen over some damned foolish thing in the Balkans. And something rather foolish is going to happen in the Balkans, specifically in the town of Sarajevo, but we'll get to that. First things first, what is going on in terms of the power struggle in Southeast Europe, in the Balkans? Well, in last unit, we saw the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Remember, the Ottoman Empire had territory in Southeast Europe, in the Balkans. But for reasons we talked about last unit, the Ottoman Empire is in a state of decline. Remember that the sultans of the Ottoman Empire, they refused to westernize, to modernize. They stuck to traditionalism and were very much against being restricted by a constitution. And in reaction to this, we saw the Young Turk Revolution. We saw the abdication of Sultan Abdul Hamid II in favor of the Young Turk Party. Remember, the Young Turks, they're ethnic Turkish nationalists. They are very westernized, very militant political party, and they have a very strict definition of what it means to be a Turkish or Ottoman citizen. So, as a part of their Turkish ethnic nationalism, we do see the persecution of religious and ethnic minorities across the Ottoman Empire. We'll talk about the Armenian genocide in our next presentation. We'll also talk about the Arabic reaction against the Ottoman Empire. But today we're going to look at the Southeastern European reaction to the decline of the Ottoman Empire. So in reaction to this Turkish nationalist organization, the Young Turks, we are going to see nationalist movements appear across the Slavic regions of the Balkans. So much like we saw in Germany, we have people in places like Serbia saying, hey, we should be a unified country for us Serbs. The Serbs are a Slavic group of people. They are one of those minorities targeted by the Young Turks, and they're going to create their own country. So we see a series of wars in the Balkans, cleverly named the Balkan Wars. These are an independence movement against the Ottoman Empire. Just kind of an AP thing. Remember that nationalist movements, generally, that's what we attribute to the end of the Ottomans. But right now, we have new independent states in the Balkans. Ottomans no longer there. Ottomans, we'll see, they stick around until the 1920s. But right now, in 1913, no more Ottomans in Southeast Europe. And now the question is, who's going to be the major influence in Southeast Europe? Is it going to be these newly independent countries, or is it going to be two bigger powers? It's really going to be a division between the Austrians and the Russians. The Austrians are looking to expand their influence in the Balkans, while in Russia, there's going to be a movement known as Pan-Slavism. The idea that Russia, as a Slavic country, has to defend its fellow Slavic countries like Serbia. And right now we're seeing a tension between who is going to be the dominant power in this power vacuum of the post-Ottoman Balkan countries. And we'll get back to this in just a second. But right now, no more Ottomans. There's a power vacuum, and there are two powers competing for influence in the Balkans, the Russians and the Austrians. And all of this is going to be the stage for what we'll talk about with these causes of World War I. Now, I have on the screen 4 main causes of World War I, and you can identify them by this acronym of MAIN. We got militarism, we got alliances, we got imperialism, and we got nationalism. And I'll explain those 4 in a second. But really, when we think about what caused World War I, historians kind of don't really agree what generally does. There tends to be 2 different camps. There's the irreconcilables, those who believe that the war was bound to happen. I'm taking the irreconcilable stance in my presentation. And then there's the revisionists, people who think that this war could have been prevented or that it was an overreaction. And in many ways, it kind of was an overreaction. One little Archduke. I was trying to quote the Joker there, but never mind. So we have these 4 long-term causes, and I'm going to explain what each of them mean in the coming slides. But you can tell by this cartoon right here, we have different logs on what will become a fire. We only need a spark to set it all off, and we'll see what that spark is in a second. But let's first look at militarism and what that's all about. Militarism is this idea that you can solve problems through military conflict, and that militarism is a way to show national supremacy. It's a way to assert independence, or at least it's a way to assert that you are a powerful country, just like the other powerful countries. So that idea of militarism is being backed up by new technologies that we are seeing as a result of the Second Industrial Revolution. We got machine guns, we got tanks, we got submarines and planes, we got poison gas. Just keep in the back of your mind, no one thinks that anyone's going to go to war at this point. It's because of all of these new terrible technologies. It would be an outrageous, uncivilized move, I should say, if anyone went to war. Because we have all of these new terrible technologies, no one in their right mind would ever use them because of how terrible they are. So we have new military technology. We have this idea you can solve problems through military action. But you also have the influence of these 2 things right here. This notion of proving national honor. We talked about in the last presentation that idea of irredentism, that some land rightfully belongs to some countries. If we use France as an example of irredentism, they believe Alsace-Lorraine, which the Germans have, rightfully belongs to the French. But you also have the influence of that idea of social Darwinism. Remember, the notion that nature, sorry, the computer slid, that nature is a state of competition, and that the fittest, they're the ones meant to survive. And if we apply this to an international stage, we have to prove our nation is the fittest. And how do we do that? Through good old healthy competition, like killing each other's young men through military conflict. And like I alluded to earlier, there's this feeling that a war could never happen in a civilized place like Europe. I mean, we are countries with democracies. We are countries who have all of these new terrible technologies. Again, no one in their right mind would go to war. There's also this idea that if we did go to war, maybe it wouldn't be that bad of a thing. I mean, sure, we could kill a bunch of people, but there's already too many people. There's a population explosion. Maybe war is a good thing for us right now. So there is optimism for war, not only from those trying to prove some social Darwinist idea of your country being the fittest, but also by these new industries like steel and petroleum. Because if you go to war, you need military equipment. And who makes these military equipments? It's these big industries. As we'll see in World War I, the profits of major industries like oil, like steel, will triple as a result of this military conflict. And then there's this notion that war isn't all that bad. It's a good thing to prove individual honor. Remember, Europe hasn't had an international war since Napoleon at this point. So there isn't really any generational experience with such a bloody and terrible conflict. So we have this notion of militarism. Let's look at another cause of World War I. It's this notion of alliances, because Europe is going to engage in a series of complicated alliances. And these alliances, they're what transform a crisis in the Balkans to a truly international conflict. And it all goes back to that idea of the balance of power. We don't want one country being more powerful than any other country. And what changed since the Congress of Vienna? Well, we have two new countries. We have Italy and Germany. Remember, no one in Europe wanted these countries to exist. They were scared that two new countries would upset the balance of power, especially if the Germans unified. Remember, the Germans, they're kind of in that Goldilocks zone of terms of climate and in terms of natural resources. It's not too cold. It's not too hot. You can grow lots of food. There's coal and lumber. So when Germany becomes a country, it's going to pose a threat to the other countries of Europe. What if Germany becomes more powerful than us? We have to restrict Germany. And then the Germans are thinking, hey, don't we deserve to be the most powerful country in Europe? We need allies to protect ourselves. So we're going to see Europe being divided into two big camps by the start of the 20th century. We got the Triple Alliance, made up originally of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. They're later joined by the Ottomans and Bulgaria, but they're going to make up what we call the Central Powers. These are conservative, very militarized countries, and they all have an interest against the opposite camp, the Allies, and we'll get to them in a second. I did say that Italy is initially involved in these Central Powers, but Italy wants territory that the Austrians have. So even though Italy will enter World War I on the side of the Germans, they're going to switch in favor of the Allies, and we'll talk about that more next presentation. But the Central Powers, very conservative, very militarized states. On the other hand, we have the Triple Entente, or the Allies. These include basically everyone that hates Germany, and I'll explain why they do in a second. But originally, we got Britain, we got the United Kingdom, we got Russia, we got France. Britain hates Germany because of their economic competition. Remember, the Germans are industrializing very quickly during the Second Industrial Revolution. They're a major economic competitor to the British, the Germans are. We got the Russians. The Germans are competing with the Russians for territory in places like modern-day Poland. And then we have France. France and Germany, natural enemies, like brothers and sisters. I was trying to quote groundskeeper Willie, but anyway. France is angry at Germany for that territory it lost in the Franco-Prussian War, Alsace-Lorraine. And the Germans, well, they want to expand further. So France and Germany are at odds with each other. And the Triple Entente is going to be joined by other powers, most notably the Japanese, the Italians, and the good old United States of America. But they also have their reasons for wanting to see the demise of Germany or Austria, in Italy's case. Japan, well, they have an alliance with the British, but more importantly, they want German territory in the South Pacific. The Japanese also are looking to try and get more land out of China, potentially taking over the German sphere of influence in China. The Italians, like I mentioned, they want land that the Austrians have. And the US is going to be involved in the anti-German club because of some things we'll talk about next presentation. Well, I'll just kind of spoil it now. The Germans are going to sink a bunch of US boats, as we'll see. And if there's one thing in American history, it's don't mess with American boats, because there's been 4 wars in US history about boats getting blown up. There's the War of 1812, there's the Spanish-American War, there's World War I, and then of course there's World War II. If I had a nickel for every time that a boat was blown up and America went to war soon after, I'd have 4 nickels. That's 20 cents. But you have all of these alliances in place. But you also have this idea of military preparedness. How would we protect our allies in the event of war? Well, there's going to be a lot of complicated military plans drawn up. There's going to be new military infrastructure that's built, railroads and defense lines. But there's also something a little sneaky going on. There's this idea of secret alliances. I just like that idea of secret alliances. They're alliances that no one else in the international community knows about, but they're making one country being the protector of another country. We'll see that with places like Britain and Belgium. The UK is going to have a secret alliance with Belgium that if anyone ever invaded Belgium, the British would attack that invader. And it's a very similar thing with Russia and Serbia. If anyone attacked Serbia, Russia was bound and pledged to protect it. And this would be a major reason why the war will escalate outside of a Balkan problem into an international conflict. Well, we'll get there. And then just to kind of show how complicated these alliances are, I have a map right here. Look through this. Italy is going to switch sides, as I mentioned. They do the same thing in World War II, but we'll get there too. Another reason for World War I, and especially why it becomes an international war, is this idea of imperialism. Remember, during the age of imperialism, there was international European and, to a degree, Japanese competition for territory. And a lot of that competition for territory was the kind of idea that maybe one day those colonies would belong to your country. So this rivalry for colonial land is a major reason why we'll see fighting in places like Africa and Asia. So, for instance, if you're the British and you're looking at German colonies, well, what if there was a conflict where I could get those German colonies? That's kind of in the back of all of these imperial powers' minds. How do we expand our colonial empires? We're running out of free territory. Let's take it from the other Europeans. So we are going to see fighting in World War I, not only in Europe, but in Africa. We'll also see it in the Middle East. We'll see it in Asia as well, and in the Pacific Ocean. But colonies are also important for the war effort, as it were, because colonies provide natural resources. They provide oil, they provide iron, and you need those stuff to make a war happen. But another thing that colonies provide, as we'll see, are soldiers. So a lot of the allies and their militaries will be comprised of colonial soldiers. For instance, with the French Foreign Legion, a lot of its soldiers are going to come from West Africa. And that's kind of a crazy idea when you think about it. If Europe is setting up these intense racial hierarchies, and they're saying to their non-white colonial subjects, hey, can you kill some white people for me? That is a very radical idea. It's going to be very important when we talk about this emerging anti-colonial movement in the 20th century. But right now, we have the introduction of ideas of anti-colonial resistance. And yet, at the same time, how does Europe get these colonies to actually get on board with all of this drafting of soldiers? Well, Europe is going to promise its colonies independence. And that is something that won't be realized until the Second World War. So we got the French Foreign Legion. We also have what the British call the ANZAC, the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. So the British are going to be supported by troops from their colonies in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, South Africa, Rhodesia. These places will send their troops to fight not only in Europe, but in Africa and Asia as well. It should be noted that out of the 7 continents, only 2 are not going to be involved in World War I, Antarctica and South America. Although I think it would be funny if penguins got involved on the side of the Allies or the Central Powers. Like an emperor, a Kaiser penguin with the little spike on his head. Anyway. So we have militarism, we have alliances, we have imperialism, we've got nationalism as well. Nationalism is going to be the ultimate kind of propaganda tool. How do we sell this war to people in our countries? Well, we got to give them something to fight for. We got to give them something to kill for. And if need be, give them something to die for. So nationalism is in many ways kind of an ultimate propaganda tool. How do we make this war palatable to people? How do we get them to go and kill their neighbors, internationally speaking? Well, nationalism in many ways is an idea of inspiration. This language of the fatherland and motherland, very gendered language, is going to be utilized in nationalist calls for to support military action. But nationalism also assists in kind of dehumanization. How do we convince people to go and kill other people? Well, we give them a nameless, faceless enemy, an enemy that stands against everything you're in favor of. So nationalism in these 2 senses is going to be a unifying factor in countries like Germany, Great Britain, France, the United States. However, nationalism is extremely dangerous for other countries, like Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottomans. And the map I have on the screen is not exactly a map of Europe in terms of national borders. It's a map of European ethnicities. So we see here with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you've got Germans, you've got Slovenes, you got Croats, you got Bosnians, you got Hungarians, you got Poles, you got, I think those are Romanians. Yeah, you got all of these different groups of people. And none of them want to be a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They don't want to be ruled over by Austrians. So we are going to see how nationalism will break up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We're also going to see how it contributes to increasing tensions with places like Serbia. Nationalism in the Balkans is going to be a problem, well, you could argue until today, but it will especially flare up again in the 1990s, and we'll get to there when we get to there. Nationalism is also dangerous for the Russians, as you might imagine. Look here, you have all of these different ethnic groups that don't want to be a part of Russia. You got Polish people, Estonians, Latvians, Finnish people. You also have nationalism as a problem in the Ottoman Empire. You not only have Turks, but you have Greek-speaking people. You got Kurds and Armenians and Arabs. You also have down here the population of Jewish settlers, and we'll get to these things later on. But the idea of ethnic or nationalist supremacy is a major reason why different countries of Europe will go to war, and it's a major reason why different empires will fall apart. And I just want to kind of show those ideas of nationalism as inspiration or dehumanization. In this poster right here, we got a French poster depicting the Germans. And oftentimes in Allied propaganda, the Germans, they'd be called the Huns or the barbarians. You can see here in this picture, they've got the German traditional pointy hat. I should really find out what it's called. I mean, I'm a German major after all. But it's a monstrous figure. It looks like King Kong. Blood dripping on his hands. He's looking to take over the world. This is something you can easily kill. This is something you need to kill if you want to save the rest of the world. But then you have this German poster right here. And this poster in English, it's basically saying, your fatherland is in danger, help us. It's this idea of protecting, defending some sort of national tradition or hierarchy, or not hierarchy, culture. And we'll talk about what this poster might be referencing more next week. But it's an American poster, and it's saying you, being a military-age conscripted male, have to protect the nation's honor. The nation is personified as a woman. You have to stand up to people who have violated her, to the Germans especially. But we have all of these long-term causes. What is the spark that will set off World War I? Well, it goes back to some damned foolish thing in the Balkans. Remember, after the Balkan independence movements, we have a power vacuum. Who's looking to fill that power vacuum? It's the Austrians. It's the Russians. The Austrians are looking to expand influence in the Balkans. They're especially going to come up against the Serbians. And the Serbians, they have this feeling of nationalism. They don't want the Austrians telling them what to do. And then on the other hand, you have our good friends, the Russians. They're experiencing what we call pan-Slavism, this notion that the Slavic country of Russia has a moral obligation to protect its sister Slavic countries, like Serbia, against those power-hungry Austrians. But within Serbia, we have a very nationalist movement looking to defend Serbia's national honor. And it's in this context that we have to talk about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand, this mustached fella right here, not this mustache fella, but this one, is going to go on a goodwill visit to the capital of Bosnia, a place called Sarajevo. He's basically looking to cool tensions with the Bosniaks. They're one of those groups that want to declare independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And it's in Sarajevo that a Serbian nationalist organization by the name of the Black Hand is going to set in motion an assassination plot. And the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is an important political figure because he's the heir to the throne of Austria. So the Black Hand gets together a bunch of assassins. And if you don't consider the fact that it started World War I, the assassination is kind of funny anyway, at least the plan. Well, there are technically multiple assassins, but there's going to be a series of events that causes each of them to fail. So one guy is going to throw a grenade at the Archduke. It bounces off of his car and blows up the car behind him. The Archduke is going to drive the wounded to a hospital, not realizing there's an assassination plot against him. One guy tries to fire his gun, but it misfires. And to escape capture, he throws himself into a very shallow riverbed. He does not drown as he wants to. And the cyanide pill that he has doesn't work either. And then you have one guy. His name is Gavrilo Princip. Princip tries to kill the Archduke, but he doesn't get the courage and he fails. And to alleviate his disappointment of not being able to kill the Archduke, he goes to a sandwich shop. He goes to a cafe. And after eating his sandwich, he's going to have the biggest stroke of luck in his life because the Archduke's car is going to take the wrong turn and pass right by the cafe he's sitting at. And Princip, with a gun, is going to slowly walk up to the car, fire 2 shots, and shoot the Archduke and his wife in the throat. Princip is quickly arrested, but he's not entirely aware of what he has just set in motion. It's a little sad. The Archduke's last words were to his wife, actually, "Think of our children." But you have the death of a major political figure. How are the nations of Europe going to respond? Well, how is Austria-Hungary going to respond? Well, we call this diplomatic crisis of how do we respond to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the July crisis. Austria-Hungary is going to say to Serbia, even though the government of Serbia had nothing to do with this, Serbia, you have to make reparations. You have to pay us for the death of our heir. And Serbia, not wanting to be bossed around by the Austrians, but also knowing that Russia backs them up no matter what they do, refuses. So how is Austria going to defend its national honor? It's going to declare war on Serbia. And here is where all of these alliances come into play, because Austria is going to declare war on Serbia. And Serbia, having a secret alliance with Russia, Russia is going to declare war on Austria-Hungary. But Austria-Hungary has an alliance with Germany, so Germany is going to declare war on Russia. But Russia has an alliance with the French, so the French declare war on the Germans. And the Germans don't want to fight a 2-front war. So they figure, let's invade France first, and then we can focus on the Russians. So the Germans come up with this super secret plan of invading Belgium. Basically a surprise attack. Don't go through the French border, go through Belgium. But Belgium has a secret alliance with the British. So the British, when the Germans invade, declare war on the Germans. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but much of our presentations cover hundreds of years of history. I just talked about 3 months. Because in 3 months, a little regional dispute over paying reparations for the death of the heir to the Austrian throne has turned into an international conflict in 3 months. And nobody thinks this war is going to last more than a few months. The common slogan is, "It'll be over by Christmas." The problem is, which Christmas? Because World War I, as we'll see, is going to be one of the deadliest conflicts in world history, lasting over 4 years. So you should consider these questions right here. What are the main long-term causes of World War I? What is the short-term cause of World War I? Who's in the Central Powers? Who's in the Allies? I have a clip right here from young Indiana Jones, just kind of showing the rapidness and the alliances of why World War I happens. Watch it on your own time. I'm going to skip it, though, because I want to show you one more thing. No. So you should be able to kind of analyze this cartoon right here and see what is it talking about, who represents who, and in general, kind of what is this depicting. All right, that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you very, very much. What time is it? It is 10:26. All right, well, go to bed, y'all, if you're watching at 10:26 p.m. All right, goodbye, everybody. Like and subscribe. Hit that notifications bell. Buy that merch.